You were never broken for loving deeply. You were never weak for staying, hoping, believing. What happened wasn't that you gave too much. It's that you gave to someone who didn't know how to hold what you offered. And that distinction changes everything. If you're a super empath, you don't just feel emotions. You read rooms, you sense shifts, you notice what's unspoken. You can feel someone pulling away before they ever say a word. And for a long time, you may have mistaken that sensitivity as something to tone down, to apologize for, to manage so others wouldn't disappear. But here's the truth you need to hear. Your depth was never the problem. Your lack of boundaries around that depth was. An avoidant relationship doesn't collapse because you wanted closeness. It collapses because one person experienced intimacy as nourishment and the other experienced it as threat. You leaned in to connect. They leaned back to survive. And somewhere along the way, you learn to chase calm instead of choosing clarity. But this is where the transformation begins. Thriving after an avoidant relationship is not about becoming colder. It's about becoming clearer. It's about recognizing that love is not something you prove through endurance. Love is not earned by tolerating emotional distance. Real connection doesn't require you to shrink your needs or soften your truth so someone else can stay comfortable. There is a divine intelligence within you that always knew when something wasn't right. That quiet ache, that wasn't insecurity, that was intuition whispering, this isn't safe for your heart. And the moment you stop silencing that voice is the moment your power returns. You see, empathy without self-respect becomes self-sacrifice. And self-sacrifice, when it's unconscious, slowly erodes the soul. Thriving means you learn to place your empathy behind your boundaries, not ahead of them. You stop leading with understanding and start leading with standards. Here's the shift. Instead of asking, why can't they show up for me? You begin asking, why am I staying where I'm not met? That single question changes your future. When you heal, you stop confusing emotional intensity with emotional intimacy. You stop bonding over potential and start choosing presence. You stop romanticizing inconsistency and start honoring reliability. And suddenly, relationships feel lighter. Not because you care less, but because you are no longer carrying what isn't yours. This is not about closing your heart. This is about anchoring it. It's about becoming someone who can love deeply and walk away calmly when love isn't returned with courage. That balance, that groundedness is what makes you magnetic. And here's the divine principle at work. When you choose yourself without bitterness, life responds with alignment. When you stop chasing emotionally unavailable people, you create space for emotionally brave ones. When you trust that consistency is not too much to ask for, you finally meet someone for whom it is natural. You are not here to save anyone. You are here to share life with someone who can stand in the same emotional sunlight as you. Someone who doesn't run when things get real. Someone who sees your empathy not as something to manage, but as something to cherish. Thriving after an avoidant relationship means this: you no longer negotiate your worth. You no longer abandon yourself to keep connection alive. You choose relationships that feel steady, safe, and reciprocal. Not because you're settling, but because you've evolved. And when that happens, your empathy stops being a wound and becomes a strength. Your heart stops being a battlefield and becomes a home. That's not just healing. That's becoming who you were always meant to be. Super empaths are often misunderstood, not only by others, but by themselves. From an early age, they tend to notice emotional undercurrents that others miss. The slight change in tone, the pause before a response, the energy shift in a room. This heightened sensitivity isn't accidental or excessive. It's a form of emotional intelligence that allows them to connect deeply, respond compassionately, and understand people beyond surface-level behavior. Yet in a world that often values emotional restraint over emotional awareness, super empaths are frequently taught, implicitly or explicitly, that they feel too much. Over time, this belief can lead them to suppress or question one of their greatest strengths. Being a super empath does not mean lacking boundaries or being endlessly available. It simply means having a nervous system that is finely tuned to the emotions of others. This attunement allows super empaths to sense distress before it is spoken, to offer comfort instinctively, and to create emotional safety for those around them. When healthy, this ability fosters profound relationships, meaningful communication, and a sense of purpose rooted in service and connection. The problem arises when this natural gift is misdirected toward people who cannot reciprocate or who unconsciously take advantage of such emotional openness. Many super empaths grow up learning that love is something you earn by being understanding, patient, and accommodating. Because they can see pain in others so clearly, they may excuse poor behavior, emotional unavailability, or inconsistency, believing that empathy requires endurance. Over time, this can lead to self-neglect. The empath begins to prioritize another person's emotional comfort over their own well-being, slowly disconnecting from their own needs. What was meant to be a gift turns into a source of exhaustion, confusion, and self-doubt, not because empathy is flawed, but because it is being poured into environments that cannot sustain it. At its core, being a super empath is not about self-sacrifice, it is about emotional clarity. True empathy includes the capacity to understand oneself with the same depth used to understand others. When super empaths learn to extend their compassion inward, they begin to recognize that their feelings are valid data, not inconveniences. Emotional fatigue, anxiety, or chronic disappointment are not signs of weakness. They are signals that boundaries are missing or being ignored. Listening to these signals is an act of self-respect, not selfishness. Thriving as a super empath requires a reframing of identity. Instead of seeing sensitivity as a liability, it becomes a compass. This inner compass helps guide decisions about where to invest emotional energy and where to withdraw it. It teaches discernment, the ability to differentiate between someone who is struggling but accountable and someone who is avoidant, dismissive, or incapable of emotional intimacy. Discernment does not harden the heart, it protects it so that love can remain open without becoming depleted. When super empaths understand that they are not too much, they stop shrinking themselves to fit into emotionally limited spaces. They no longer apologize for wanting depth, consistency, and connection. Their emotional awareness becomes a stabilizing force rather than a draining one. They learn that being deeply attuned is a strength when paired with boundaries, self-trust, and the courage to walk away from relationships that require constant self-abandonment. In its healthiest expression, super empathy is a leadership quality. It allows individuals to inspire, nurture, and create meaningful bonds rooted in authenticity. When directed inward and outward with equal care, it becomes a source of resilience and wisdom. Rather than dimming their sensitivity, super empaths learn to anchor it, grounding their emotional depth in self-worth, clarity, and intentional choice. This is how sensitivity transforms from a burden into a powerful, life-affirming gift. Avoidant relationships often leave a lasting emotional imprint, not because they were deeply nourishing, but because they quietly exposed places where needs went unmet and boundaries were unclear. For many people, especially those who feel deeply, these relationships can feel confusing, destabilizing, and disproportionately painful. Yet their true purpose is rarely to provide lasting connection. Instead, they function as mirrors, reflecting patterns that might otherwise remain hidden. What feels like a failure is often a revelation, one that invites deeper self-awareness and growth. In an avoidant dynamic, one person typically seeks closeness, reassurance, and emotional presence, while the other retreats when intimacy deepens. This push and pull creates a cycle of hope and disappointment. The avoidant partner may offer moments of warmth followed by distance, triggering anxiety and self-doubt in the other. Over time, the person who desires connection may begin to internalize the distance, asking what they did wrong or what they need to fix to be chosen fully. The relationship becomes less about mutual connection and more about proving worth. What these dynamics reveal is not a lack of value, but a pattern of self-abandonment. In trying to preserve the relationship, many people ignore their own discomfort, rationalize inconsistency, or minimize their needs. They may confuse patience with love and endurance with loyalty. The avoidant relationship exposes this tendency by amplifying it. Each moment of emotional withdrawal asks an unspoken question: Will you stay connected to yourself, or will you disconnect from yourself to stay connected to them? These relationships also highlight the absence of boundaries, not because boundaries were never desired, but because they were feared. Boundaries can feel risky to those who worry that asserting needs will push others away. In avoidant relationships, this fear often proves true, but the lesson is not that boundaries are dangerous. It is that they reveal incompatibility. When someone pulls away in response to healthy needs, it clarifies that the relationship cannot support emotional reciprocity. The pain lies not in setting the boundary, but in realizing what it costs to ignore it. Avoidant dynamics also bring unconscious beliefs to the surface. Many people carry a quiet narrative that love must be earned through effort, understanding, or self-sacrifice. When paired with an avoidant partner, this belief becomes activated. The emotional distance is interpreted as a challenge to overcome rather than a signal to reassess. The relationship becomes a project fueled by the hope that if enough patience or compassion is offered, closeness will finally arrive. In reality, no amount of emotional labor can create availability where it does not exist. What makes these relationships particularly transformative is that they force a confrontation with reality. Eventually, the emotional cost becomes too high to ignore. Exhaustion, resentment, or loss of self emerges, not as punishment, but as protection. These feelings serve as internal alarms, signaling that something essential is being compromised. The relationship, in its dysfunction, becomes a catalyst for awakening. It exposes the gap between what is desired and what is being accepted. Through this lens, avoidant relationships are not mistakes, but initiations. They initiate a deeper understanding of self-worth, emotional needs, and personal responsibility. They reveal that love cannot be sustained by potential alone, and that consistency matters more than intensity. Most importantly, they teach that choosing oneself is not an act of abandonment, but an act of alignment. The pain experienced is not meaningless. It is instructional, guiding individuals toward relationships that honor mutual presence, emotional courage, and genuine connection. When the lesson is integrated, the narrative shifts. The focus moves from what went wrong to what was learned. The relationship no longer defines the person's capacity to love, but refines it. What once felt like a loss becomes a turning point, an experience that dismantles illusions and replaces them with clarity. In this way, avoidant relationships serve a profound purpose. They illuminate the path back to self-trust, where healthier, more fulfilling connections can finally take root. Healing does not begin the moment someone else changes. It begins the moment a person stops waiting for that change. For those who have been shaped by avoidant relationships, this realization can feel both liberating and unsettling. There is often a long period spent hoping that clarity, reassurance, or emotional safety will come from the other person. Yet true healing starts when the focus shifts inward, away from managing someone else's availability and toward cultivating an internal sense of security that no one can withdraw. Many people mistake emotional safety as something that is granted by another person's consistency, affection, or validation. While healthy relationships do provide reassurance, relying on someone else to regulate one's emotional world creates vulnerability. When that person pulls away, the sense of safety collapses. Healing requires understanding that safety is not a reward for being chosen. It is a foundation built through self-trust, emotional honesty, and grounded boundaries. It is something created, not earned. Creating safety within oneself begins with acknowledging emotional reality without judgment. Feelings such as anxiety, sadness, or longing are not flaws to be eliminated. They are signals asking for attention and care. Instead of suppressing these emotions or seeking immediate relief through external validation, healing invites a pause. In that pause, a person learns to sit with their experience, listen to it, and respond with compassion rather than urgency. This practice rebuilds trust in one's own inner world, something often eroded in relationships where needs were minimized or dismissed. Another crucial aspect of internal safety is consistency with oneself. Avoidant relationships are often destabilizing because they are unpredictable, and unpredictability trains the nervous system to stay on high alert. Healing means becoming the steady presence that was once sought from another. This can look like honoring commitments made to oneself, maintaining routines that support emotional well-being, and making choices aligned with personal values even when loneliness or fear arises. Over time, this consistency teaches the nervous system that it no longer has to brace for abandonment. There is a reliable anchor within. Boundaries also play a vital role in creating safety. Boundaries are not walls meant to keep people out. They are structures that define what is safe to let in. When someone learns to set and uphold boundaries, they send a powerful message to themselves. My needs matter and I will protect them. This self-protection is not aggressive or defensive. It is grounded and calm. It replaces the impulse to over-explain or over-accommodate with a quiet confidence rooted in self-respect. Healing further deepens when individuals stop seeking closure through another person's understanding. Closure comes from clarity, and clarity comes from accepting reality as it is rather than how it was hoped to be. When someone accepts that another person's inability to show up is not a reflection of their worth, a heavy burden lifts. The energy once spent analyzing, waiting, or replaying conversations is reclaimed and redirected toward personal growth and fulfillment. As internal safety strengthens, relationships are no longer approached from a place of desperation or fear. Connection becomes a choice rather than a necessity for emotional stability. This shift transforms how love is experienced. Instead of clinging to potential or tolerating emotional distance, individuals become attuned to how a relationship feels in their body, calm or chaotic, nourishing or draining. They learn to trust these sensations as guidance rather than dismiss them as overreactions. Ultimately, creating safety within oneself is an act of self-leadership. It is the decision to become the source of steadiness, compassion, and protection that was once outsourced to others. This internal foundation does not eliminate the desire for connection, it refines it. Love becomes something that complements an already stable inner world rather than something that holds it together. And from this place, healing is no longer fragile. It is rooted, resilient, and enduring. Discernment is often misunderstood as judgment, but in reality, it is an expression of wisdom and self-respect. It is the ability to observe, assess, and choose with clarity rather than react from emotion or hope. For those who have spent time in avoidant relationships, discernment becomes a crucial turning point. It marks the shift from asking whether someone will finally show up to recognizing whether they are capable of doing so at all. This awareness is not cold or cynical, it is grounded in truth. Without discernment, emotional availability can be mistaken for potential. Small moments of affection, vulnerability, or effort are magnified and treated as promises rather than what they are, isolated behaviors within a larger pattern. Discernment teaches individuals to look at consistency instead of intensity. It asks not how deeply someone can feel in rare moments, but how reliably they can be present over time. This shift prevents emotional energy from being invested in situations that cannot sustain it. Learning discernment also requires separating empathy from obligation. Highly empathetic people often understand why someone behaves the way they do. They see childhood wounds, fear of intimacy, or past trauma, and this understanding can create a sense of responsibility to stay. Discernment reminds them that understanding someone's pain does not mean accepting pain as the cost of connection. Compassion can coexist with distance. One can wish someone well without offering them access to one's emotional world. True discernment involves paying attention to how interactions feel rather than how they are explained. Words can be persuasive, especially when they express regret, intention, or self-awareness. Behavior, however, reveals capacity. Someone may acknowledge their avoidance, promise growth, or express care. But if their actions continue to create instability, discernment calls for acceptance rather than negotiation. This acceptance is not resignation. It is clarity about what is and is not available. Another element of discernment is recognizing when effort is one-sided. Healthy relationships include mutual initiation, curiosity, and emotional labor. When one person consistently carries the weight of communication, reassurance, and repair, it signals imbalance. Discernment helps individuals see that love should not require constant pursuit. If connection depends on one person's vigilance, something essential is missing. Choosing not to chase is not giving up, it is honoring reciprocity. Discernment also protects against self-betrayal. In the absence of clarity, people often override their instincts, rationalize discomfort, or delay decisions in the hope that things will improve. Over time, this creates an internal fracture. The self learns that its signals will be ignored. Discernment restores integrity by aligning choices with inner truth. When actions match intuition, trust in oneself strengthens, making future decisions clearer and less emotionally taxing. As discernment deepens, standards naturally evolve. These standards are not rigid checklists, but reflections of lived experience. They are shaped by lessons learned through pain and growth. Reliability, emotional presence, and respect become non-negotiable, not because perfection is expected, but because inconsistency has proven costly. Discernment ensures that access to one's energy is granted intentionally, not automatically. Ultimately, discernment is an act of self-love. It allows individuals to move through relationships with open eyes and an open heart without abandoning themselves in the process. It creates space for connections that are steady, mutual, and life-giving. By choosing clarity over fantasy and presence over potential, people reclaim their power. They stop trying to be chosen and start choosing wisely, creating relationships that honor both love and self-respect. After an avoidant relationship, many people are left feeling emotionally drained, confused, and unsure of how to love without losing themselves. The instinctive response is often to pull back completely or to harden the heart in self-protection. Yet thriving does not come from emotional shutdown. It comes from redefining how love is given and received. The essential shift is moving from emotional overgiving to self-led love, where care for others is guided by a deep commitment to one's own well-being. Emotional overgiving is not generosity. It is often a survival strategy. In avoidant relationships, overgiving can become a way to maintain closeness, prevent distance, or earn reassurance. It may look like constant availability, excessive understanding, or sacrificing personal needs to keep the peace. While these behaviors may create temporary connection, they erode self-worth over time. The giver becomes depleted, while the dynamic remains unchanged. Thriving requires recognizing that love offered from self-abandonment is unsustainable. Self-led love begins with internal leadership, the ability to guide one's actions based on values rather than fear. Instead of asking what will keep someone else engaged, the focus shifts to what feels aligned, respectful, and nourishing. This internal leadership creates a new relationship with choice. Love is no longer something that happens to a person. It is something they actively shape through boundaries, discernment, and self-awareness. One of the most transformative aspects of self-led love is learning to pause before giving. Rather than responding automatically to another's needs or moods, individuals learn to check in with themselves first. Is this coming from genuine desire or from fear of losing connection? Is this an act of care or an attempt to manage someone else's emotions? This pause restores agency. It ensures that giving is a choice, not a compulsion. Self-led love also redefines responsibility. In avoidant dynamics, one person often carries the emotional weight of the relationship, taking responsibility for communication, repair, and emotional regulation. Thriving means releasing responsibility for what does not belong to oneself. Another person's inability to show up is not a problem to solve. When responsibility is returned to its rightful owner, emotional energy is freed and redirected toward growth, creativity, and fulfillment. Another key element of self-led love is consistency with oneself. Overgiving often fluctuates with external validation, feeling valuable when needed and unimportant when ignored. Self-led love builds steadiness. It involves honoring personal boundaries even when it feels uncomfortable, keeping promises made to oneself, and maintaining self-respect regardless of another's response. This consistency creates a stable inner environment, reducing anxiety and increasing confidence. As this new way of loving takes root, relationships begin to feel different. There is less urgency and more presence, less chasing and more choosing. Instead of pouring energy into uncertain connections, individuals invest in relationships that are reciprocal and emotionally available. They learn that love does not have to be exhausting to be meaningful. Ease becomes a sign of alignment rather than boredom. Self-led love does not diminish empathy, it refines it. Compassion becomes balanced with discernment. Care is extended without self-erasure. From this place, love becomes expansive rather than depleting. It supports growth rather than survival. Thriving after an avoidant relationship is not about becoming less loving, it is about becoming rooted in self-respect, clarity, and the quiet confidence that love given from wholeness will always lead to healthier, more fulfilling connections. Empathy is one of the most powerful human capacities. It allows people to feel with others, to understand experiences beyond their own, and to offer presence that heals. Yet when empathy exists without self-respect, it can quietly turn into self-neglect. Many people who find themselves repeatedly drawn into avoidant or emotionally unavailable relationships are not lacking love or compassion, they are overflowing with it. What they often lack is the structure that protects that compassion from being misused or drained. Self-respect is the grounding force that gives empathy direction. Without it, empathy becomes indiscriminate, flowing toward anyone who expresses pain or need, regardless of whether they can reciprocate. This is where imbalance forms. Understanding someone's wounds can create a sense of obligation to stay, to fix, or to endure. Empathy says, I see why you are this way. Self-respect adds, and I also see what this cost me. Both truths must coexist for empathy to remain healthy. When empathy is unpaired from self-respect, people begin to tolerate behavior they would never recommend to someone they love. Emotional inconsistency, avoidance, broken promises, or lack of accountability are excused because the other person is trying, hurting, or not ready. Over time, the empath's needs become negotiable, while the other person's limitations are treated as sacred. This imbalance erodes self-worth and creates a subtle resentment that often turns inward. Pairing empathy with self-respect changes how relationships are evaluated. Instead of asking whether someone's behavior is understandable, the question becomes whether it is acceptable. This shift is crucial. Many behaviors make sense in the context of someone's history, but not all of them are compatible with a healthy relationship. Self-respect allows individuals to acknowledge context without sacrificing standards. It makes room for compassion without self-betrayal. Self-respect also influences communication. When empathy leads without self-respect, conversations often revolve around reassurance, explanation, and emotional labor aimed at keeping the other person comfortable. Needs are softened, delayed, or expressed indirectly to avoid triggering distance. With self-respect present, communication becomes clearer and more grounded. Needs are stated without apology. Boundaries are expressed without over-justification. There is less fear of being too much and more trust in one's right to ask for what is needed. Another vital aspect of pairing empathy with self-respect is recognizing when to disengage emotionally. Empathy does not require constant access. It is possible to care about someone while choosing distance from a dynamic that causes harm. Self-respect grants permission to step back without guilt. It understands that love does not mean unlimited availability and that walking away from emotional depletion is not cruelty, it is wisdom. As self-respect strengthens, empathy becomes more selective and sustainable. Energy is offered where it is received, valued, and reciprocated. This selectivity does not harden the heart, it preserves it. Relationships become less chaotic and more nourishing because they are built on mutual regard rather than imbalance. The empath no longer feels responsible for carrying the emotional weight of the connection alone. When empathy and self-respect are integrated, a person's presence becomes both warm and grounded. They can listen deeply without losing themselves. They can offer support without abandoning their own needs. This balance transforms empathy from a liability into a strength that attracts healthier relationships. It signals emotional maturity, self-awareness, and inner stability. Ultimately, empathy paired with self-respect creates love that is both kind and strong. It honors connection without sacrificing dignity. It allows individuals to show up fully while remaining anchored in their own worth. This is the kind of empathy that sustains rather than drains, and the kind of love that supports thriving, not survival. At some point in healing, the focus shifts from understanding the past to consciously choosing the future. This is where the deepest lesson emerges, the realization that love should feel steady, not uncertain, safe, not destabilizing, mutual, not one-sided. After experiencing avoidant relationships, many people begin to see that emotional chemistry alone is not enough to sustain connection. What truly nourishes the heart is consistency, presence, and the shared willingness to face emotional reality together. Consistency is often underestimated because it lacks drama. It does not create emotional highs or lows. Instead, it offers reliability. For those accustomed to unpredictability, consistency can initially feel unfamiliar or even boring. Yet it is within this steadiness that trust grows. When someone shows up in ways that align with their words, the nervous system relaxes. There is no need to analyze tone, timing, or distance. This calm is not the absence of passion, it is the presence of safety. Choosing consistency means valuing peace over adrenaline and stability over emotional suspense. Presence is another cornerstone of healthy connection. Emotional presence goes beyond physical proximity or frequent communication. It is the willingness to be engaged, responsive, and attuned even when conversations are uncomfortable. In avoidant dynamics, presence is often conditional, available during ease, absent during vulnerability. Learning to choose presence means recognizing that emotional availability is a skill and a value, not a personality trait. It involves selecting partners who can stay connected through complexity rather than retreat from it. Mutual emotional courage is what binds consistency and presence together. Emotional courage is the capacity to be honest about feelings, needs, and fears without shutting down or deflecting. It requires accountability and self-awareness. In relationships marked by avoidance, one person often carries the burden of courage alone, initiating conversations, naming issues, and holding space for repair. Choosing differently means refusing to participate in dynamics where emotional labor is unequal. It means valuing partners who can meet vulnerability with openness rather than defensiveness. As this lesson integrates, standards naturally evolve. There is a move away from romanticizing potential and toward honoring reality. Potential is inspiring, but it cannot replace lived experience. A relationship is not defined by what someone might become, but by who they consistently are. This clarity prevents the cycle of waiting and hoping that once dominated avoidant connections. It empowers individuals to make decisions based on present behavior rather than future promises. Choosing relationships rooted in these qualities also requires patience and trust in timing. After chaos, calm can feel unfamiliar, and it may take time to adjust to healthier dynamics. This period of recalibration is not emptiness, it is integration. It is the space where old patterns lose their grip and new ones take shape. Trusting this process is an act of faith in one's growth and worth. When consistency, presence, and emotional courage become non-negotiable, relationships transform from sources of anxiety into spaces of support. Love becomes collaborative rather than competitive, grounding rather than consuming. There is room for individuality alongside togetherness, and challenges are faced as shared experiences rather than threats to connection. This final lesson is not about perfection, it is about alignment. It is the understanding that thriving in love requires choosing partners who are willing to meet you where you are, not where they wish you would stay. It is the decision to honor emotional truth, even when it means walking away from familiarity. In choosing relationships that embody steadiness, presence, and courage, individuals step into a new chapter, one defined not by survivor, L, but by genuine, sustainable connection. Thank you for sharing your time, trust, and openness. May the clarity you've gained continue to guide you toward love that feels safe, steady, and true. Goodbye for now, and remember, choosing yourself is never a loss. It's the beginning of everything you deserve.